Good morning, everybody. This is Sriram, President of TAI Japan, coming to you from Tokyo. Namaskar, and I have the wonderful pleasure of having a fellow CM who is going to present some absolutely insightful wisdom. I have great pleasure in introducing Terry Lloyd. Terry is an absolutely awesome entrepreneur. I think God made him to be an entrepreneur. He will tell you more about his life story. And I think if anybody wants to do business in Japan or wants to do a startup, Terry is the guy to go to. He has got so much experience and so much wisdom that TAI Japan has been an immense beneficiary. Over to you, Terry. So we have about 30 odd minutes for your presentation, and we will take some Q&A at the end of it. All yours, Terry.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Sriram. I'm not sure that I deserve that praise, but anyway, thank you so much. Basically, today I'm speaking about market entry and fundraising in Japan. This presentation is available if anybody wants it. They can contact Sriram or me directly. My contact details are on the last slide, and I'd be happy to give it out because there's quite a lot of information here. I'm going to be speaking for about 45 minutes and then take questions. So if anybody has questions, you feel free to raise your hand during the session, but you can also save them up till the end.
So Terry, the Q&A will come through the chat, and I will moderate the Q&A at the end of your session.
That's fine. Yeah, you can just interrupt me also if it looks like it's an interesting question. Go ahead.
Yep.
Okay, so I've been in Japan for quite some time, actually already more than 35 years, about 30, almost 37 years. During that time, I founded 17 companies in Japan, 4 elsewhere in Asia, and actually a few others in other countries as well. My most recent formation was a company in Switzerland about 6 months ago. So I have a long history of raising money and then, doing the earn-out and also being involved in other people's IPOs. I've never actually done an IPO myself. Probably that will change with the next company that I'm working on at the moment. I have about 50 staff. My policy is to sell companies when they get to about 100 to 150 people, because you forget everyone's name and the job description changes, and it's just not fun anymore. And as Sriram said, God made me to start companies, so why ignore what God tells me to do? Right now I'm running a company called Japan Travel KK. Because I've been involved long-term in both technology and also in content, I decided to make a tourist-oriented business, which is basically a stack. At the top of the stack is publishing and digital marketing. In the middle is the travel agency, and at the bottom is software development. And in fact, I took over a company in Pune earlier on this year that was making a tourism-focused back end for travel agents. We re-architected it and relaunched the product, and the first iteration came out about 3 weeks ago. The next iteration will be out in January. This company was doing really well until February, and then of course COVID came along. But the good thing about having set up and run 17 companies so far is that I'm used to adversity. And luckily, with the full stack, one of the pieces of the stack is actually doing very well, which is the digital agency and publishing business. Okay, so, for us to have a calling in life, we have to be connected to the universe, connected to the people around us. What I'm trying to achieve with Japan Travel is social impact. Of course, it's a business. We're here to make money, but more than that, we're here to help inbound tourists help Japanese help themselves. And one of the big issues in Japan is that there is a depopulation going on in the countryside. Many of the old traditions are being lost. And the reason is because Japanese would rather be comfortable in the big cities, and they don't want to live in the countryside where it's hard. So we want to use tourists to bring finance and cash flow back to those communities and make it meaningful for people who want to stay in the countryside and keep their traditions alive. So that's my mission. But that isn't, talking about me is not the objective of today. Today I want to help you understand how to get into the market, and then secondly, how to get funding, and thirdly, a brief section on what it might cost. So let's take a look at Japan first of all. Japan and India actually have very good relations, which started off roughly about 15 years ago in a more accelerated manner, and today includes significant amounts of Japanese funding of Indian infrastructure projects. Japan itself is still, despite all the news about it going downhill and old people and that kind of thing, Japan is still the world's third biggest single economy with 5 trillion in GDP. China is now bigger than Japan in terms of GDP, but the thing to remember is that the average Chinese person has 10,000 USD of dollars of spending power, whereas the average Japanese is 4 times that. So coming to Japan is a good decision, not only based on the fact that people have money, but also other factors like rule of law, which sometimes we struggle to find in China. But it is true that Japan is starting to wane. And in fact, when I originally built this presentation about 10 years ago for a business group in Australia, although this particular presentation is modified for today. Actually, I used to quote a population of 127 million people in Japan. The estimate as of June is that there are 125 million. So that's a significant reduction. And Japan is basically losing about 300 to 400,000 people a year. This will accelerate, and by 2020, only 30 years from now, there will be less than 100 million people in the country, which is quite amazing, a 20% population decrease. Another significant thing is that over 65s represent almost 30% of the population. Now, 65 sounds old, but I can tell you I'm 62, Sriram, you're roughly the same age, aren't you, without giving away?
I'm a little younger than you, Terry. I'm a little younger than you.
Oh, okay. Sriram is 25. He's been 25 for at least 35 years.
Yeah, something like that.
Right, okay. But in any case, you know, 65 doesn't mean much in Japan anymore. 65 is the new 45. Actually, the average age of farmers in Japan has just hit 70 years old. My wife has a house in a farming valley in southern Japan. We're going there tomorrow, and we like to hang out with the neighbors. They're all in their 70s and 80s, and I can tell you they're a lot stronger than either of us. It's quite amazing watching them in the fields in their 80s, and they'll do that all day, every day. There's hardly any kids. The number of kids that were born this year was less than 1 million, which is well under replacement. And if you're thinking about whether to sell to kids or some other demographic, you might actually make more money selling to cats and dogs. Well, the owners of cats and dogs. And in fact, in my area in Shibuya, some kids' clothing stores have converted to become dog and cat clothing shops. And there's literally almost 50% more pets than there are kids under 10. Another thing to know about Japan is it's very homogeneous. 98% of all people living in Japan are Japanese. And then we have just a few other nationalities, number of Indians in Japan. I've lost track, but maybe around 10,000 or so, Sriram?
No, a little more, maybe about close to 50,000 totally.
Oh, 50,000, okay. Sorry, I'm way out of date. Okay. Politics. Japan is a very conservative country. You could say it's somewhat similar to Singapore, not quite as harsh in terms of laws, but certainly has a lot of the same values. We have a new prime minister who started in September, but he's hardly new because he was the man behind the scene for the old prime minister who had been with us for 7 years, Abe-san. Mr. Abe, unfortunately, is mired in an election fund scandal. He nominally stepped down because he's sick, but there's a lot of rumors going on that he stepped down for more than just that reason. But nonetheless, Suga is the new PM. He's the main force. He was the main force behind Abe, and so we're going to see more of the same policies. Although he, in some ways, is more aggressive. And one of the most surprising things he did, not 2 weeks after he came to power, was to announce that he was going to banish personal seals, otherwise known as hanko. For those of you who may know Japan, you may know that these personal seals are as good as your personal signature. And if somebody steals the seal, they can commit you to contracts, they can make you get married, divorced, just about anything. You don't have to be there in person to use it. So the idea of getting rid of these seals, which is a really antiquated system, is really great news. So this will be good for business, but unfortunately, Suga is also noted for another factor, and that is his repression of freedom of the press. So this is not such a good thing if you want to protest about the way Japan is being run. Japan is very much connected to the US over defense. Japan has pledged not to have an outgoing army. It does have a large standing military. In fact, the number 6 in the world in terms of military spending. But nominally, they do not have nuclear weapons, and therefore they depend on the US for a nuclear umbrella. This is very relevant because we have a country nearby which is very nuclear, which is North Korea. And North Korea and Japan absolutely hate each other. And then, of course, there are Chinese who don't have much love for Japan either. And indeed, there's quite a lot of tension between Japan and China over oil rights, ocean-based oil rights, underneath a set of islands called the Senkakus, which are off the northwest of Taiwan. So Japan wants to show leadership regionally, but the reality is that it is very much in the US sphere. This is obviously a good thing right now with the cooperation between Australia, the US, and India, and I suspect that Japan will get involved in that as well. The economy, people talk about how huge the Japanese government debt is. You may recall that in a previous slide, I said that the GDP is about $5 trillion. The debt is 200% of GDP. This sounds like a pretty desperate situation, and in most countries it would be. But one thing that is very unique about Japan is that almost all this debt is owned by locals. And therefore, because they're still willingly paying taxes, and there doesn't seem to be any particular influence on the value of the Japanese yen vis-a-vis its trading partners, and there's no pressure to de-escalate. So when the government announced that it was going to spend $1 trillion on COVID, basically they did so, and everybody was quite happy about it. Quite unlike the US, where there's a lot of fighting going on. So exports are about 18.5% of GDP. They're quite important to Japan. I was interested to see this is a similar GDP level for exports as to India, actually about 0.1% difference. The Nikkei, our national, our stock index for the Tokyo Stock Exchange is at 26,500. It's high compared to the last 5 years, but back in 1989 when we had the stock market bubble, we were almost double that. So I would say that Japan actually, unlike the States, is not at the top. We're somewhere just above middle, which completely agrees with this whole idea of the country being conservative. But here's the most important thing for you to know if you're looking at coming to Japan. The Japanese TSE, the main stock market, there are multiple stock markets in Japan, has 3,700 companies and is worth about 1 times GDP in terms of market cap. But what's interesting is those companies themselves have more than their net worth in cash and short-term securities. That means that many of these companies are actually being traded under their book value. It also means that a lot of these companies have a lot of funds. The numbers vary, but what I've heard is that discretionary cash is roughly just under 1 trillion US dollars, which is pretty significant. Now, if your company is interested in M&A discussions later on with Japanese companies, they can borrow money at less than 0.3% per annum for 10 years. So that means that Japanese are willing to pay much higher multiples than your average US company, which normally pays for a 3-year amortization and sometimes 5 years. Japanese can think in terms of 10-year amortization. So what's hot in the country? Basically, these are some of the sectors: power, software, products, especially products that make you well, and defense. And of course, looking after old people, especially diapers for old people. Hopefully I don't, well, neither of us 3RAM have to buy that product for a while.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. So what sells? Okay, well, if you're new to the Japanese market, you have 2 choices, basically. You can do B2B or B2C, or if it's B2B, B2B2C. The fundamental difference between the 2 is that B2C is a very straightforward market penetration exercise. You're either good at marketing and understand the audience, or you're not. If you're good, you'll get very quick take up, and consumers don't really care if you're Japanese or non-Japanese. They just care about the product and your ability to support it and market it. Japanese companies, on the other hand, just like political parties, and getting into these companies is extremely difficult. Most of the companies have been around for 50 or 100 years. There are thousands of companies that have been around for more than 100 years. And they've spent a long time building their customer base. So they're very reluctant to allow people to just waltz in and start selling to their customers. They want to know everything about your product. They want to know that you're going to be there to support them. They want great pricing. They're very slow to move. And then they need a lot of prodding to get out there and engage with their customers. But if you can do all those things, then B2B relationships are actually great, because most Japanese companies, as I say, are well cashed up, which means that they'll carry a lot of the burden for you. And as you'll see later, it's not unusual to get Japanese companies to actually pay for the operating costs in Japan if you're doing a joint venture, while you supply the IP and the smarts. So core advantages to help you in negotiating and getting better deals are, first of all, obviously having great technology, but also, very importantly, patents. Japanese are really interested in patents. The reason is because in every sector, there are at least 3 to 5 major players with plenty of cash who are all fighting over market share. And anyone who can find a new product that they can protect from competition is going to be of high interest. Apart from that, obvious things like global brand name, global partnerships that you may already have that give credibility, IP richness, and so on. There are about 2.5 million active companies in Japan. So it does mean that with enough due diligence, diligent sourcing, you should be able to find a partner. Okay, so how to get it done? Japanese corporates do live in a busy world, in a noisy world. Now, I'm assuming this is a B2B approach. Let's talk about IT for a minute, since that's my main space. A company that I know very well, which is one of the leading trading companies in Japan, called Itochu, or C-Ito, does roughly about 130 or 140 billion USD in sales every year. This company once told me a couple of years ago that they get a proposal from around the world roughly once an hour. So for you to be able to get their attention, you not only have to meet the right people, but you have to stay in contact with them. And this very much means that you need somebody here in Japan on the ground who's engaging with that particular partner. So point number one, if you're coming to Japan, you need somebody on the ground. It could be a consultant, could be an employee, could be your embassy, but it needs to be somebody who is going to spend the time and make things happen. Point number two is that because these companies are getting so many proposals, and because each proposal that really gets adopted and taken seriously has to go to the board, your best bet is to get somebody who is connected to the board. So in talking to your local guy here in Japan, or if you're making the approach directly, you want to make sure that you're not only talking to the people who actually receive the proposals, but that you've actually met somebody on the board. And if you haven't met that person, you're probably not going to get a deal with them. So the biggest challenges in getting that attention is, of course, making sure that your product matches the market, your ability to localize and customize the product, because Japanese are really picky and they really need things to work the way they want them to work. And then keeping up with all the minutiae that you will be asked for by the Japanese side. And I kid you not, on every product, on every iteration, they will ask 10 very deep questions that make you wonder if they're going to copy your product. But rest assured that most Japanese companies do respect the law, especially the larger companies. And as long as you've got a well-worded contract and it's been signed, you should feel free to yield information. Not code, obviously, but the next best thing. There are some copycats out there. So it obviously behooves you to patent if you can patent. And if not, then as I say, make sure that your contract is solid. Once you actually start moving into the market, the next really big thing is finding staff. There are roughly 1.9 job offers for every person who is seeking a job in Japan. So there's a lot of competition, even during COVID. And in the technical space, I would say there's probably more like 3 job offers for every person available. So as a result, smaller startups and also foreign companies really find it difficult to find good staff. One really good way, method around this, is to make sure your first hire, not the person who was generating the original business, but your actual first hire, be they a CEO or somebody else, make sure that they come with a great network. And if you're lucky, they may start recruiting some of the people that worked for them in a previous company and bring them along with you. Another big thing is that Japanese GAAP is not the same as US GAAP. And so you will find that there are lots of things that you have to do to harmonize your accounting, your employee benefits and stock option plans and that kind of thing. In order to get into the Japanese market, of course, I've been talking about partnerships and that kind of thing. But usually to find a partner, first you have to actually validate whether or not your product fits the market. I tend to use a direct pre-selling approach. So basically, I will package the product as if it's on its way and then go and find some real customers. And in finding those customers, you'll actually get a lot of feedback about what's good and bad about your product, about your presentation, and also who is already in the market and what their strengths and weaknesses are. This will help you a lot in figuring out if you're going to go with a partner or a distributor, if you're going to represent yourself, you know, who to look for and what points you need to address or cater for through what you've found out from the market. I am going to talk a little bit more about cost later, but in terms of actually doing this market research, generally speaking, and by the way, I was the managing director of the State of Ohio Trade Development Office here in Japan for 7 years. So I have a lot of experience in this area. Generally, it takes 150 to 200 hours to approach about 20 to 30 potential distributors or partners. So it's really a numbers game. It's like dating. And generally, you will wind up with 3 to 5 viable candidates. So those market entry consultants are going to cost you somewhere between 150 and 250 USD an hour. So you need to leave a budget of at least 30,000 USD if you're really serious about your research and your search for a partner. So there are four business models, actually 3 sectors, and then 4 subsectors. So if you are only interested in making money out of Japan without owning brand and controlling the marketing and that kind of thing, the easiest thing is to find a distributor. And this is what most companies do. I would say 70, 80, 90% of companies do this. But there are some companies that really think that their brand is important. They want to preserve it and build it. And so they go for either sort of like a joint venture arrangement where they are exerting control over their joint venture to some degree, or they just want to come in directly. Generally speaking, the guys who come in directly are the big guys. We're talking millions of dollars of commitment in order to get to break even. There are companies like Microsoft, Apple, Salesforce.com, those types of companies. Most startups and most mid-level tech firms will go for a joint venture, and they will assign somebody from head office for 3 years to represent their interests in the joint venture and to keep bird dogging the whole thing. So more to that, if you're going to have a distributor, Japanese really start slowly. You're going to find that this is totally normal. It'll take you months and months of negotiation. But once they do decide to sign the contract, they'll move very, very quickly after that. It's very important, I feel, that when you are engaging with a distributor, as I say, that you have a local person, you need to be prepared for lots of face-to-face contact. This is a big Japanese thing. Of course, we're using Zoom right at the moment, but even in the age of Zoom, any serious business deals are getting done person on person. So, you know, if you're thinking about generating business in 2021, you need to allow at least for 1 to 2 visits to Japan during that period. And joint ventures, I've kind of gone into this already, so I'll skip that. This may be interesting to you. This is a typical software revenue channel percentage, you know, model, how it's all divided out. So if you're doing your own localization, meaning taking your software and making it not only in Japanese, but making it fit the Japanese business model, then in that case, depending on whether or not you're using somebody else, like a distributor to help you, or whether you're doing it all yourself, these are some of the revenue drops that you're going to do. What you'll find is that the resellers will usually take that 35% and give a 20% discount to the customer. So they wind up making somewhere between 10 and 15%. Now, you might say, well, this is a large amount of money being distributed, in some cases 60% across the distribution channel. So most companies have what they call a Japan premium. When they localize the product for Japan, they increase the price, the USD price, usually by about 30%. And then in that way, with dilution, you wind up with maybe 50 or 60% of the revenue you would have received in the States, even though it may only be 40% in Japan. And this, again, is an idea of how complex it can be. Some software companies like to go direct to the customer, as I said, like Apple, for example, or Salesforce.com. Huge investments involved. So most of us go through distributors and then either direct or channel or OEMs. Okay, so getting funding. This is obviously for people who are in seed or Series A mode. Generally speaking, Series B funding, you can find it just about anywhere else. It's pretty common these days. But Japan is not richly priced. I find that generally speaking, seed round in Japan is about a third of what it is in the US and the EU. So I don't recommend early stage funding here unless you already have some strategic relationship or a particular purpose for being here. However, for Series A, Japanese are quite useful for Series A, not through venture capital companies, but from strategic investors. In other words, companies that are already in your space and who are interested in using your technology for a Japan play. Now, sometimes those strategic investors might be multinationals, in which case they want to roll out internationally, but often as not, they just simply want the technology for Japan. So as long as you're willing to ring fence Japan from the rest of your global strategy, what you can do, and what I recommend the companies that I'm involved in doing, is getting strategic investment from Japan, because Japanese are somewhat valuation insensitive. In other words, they'll pay a lot more money for a given product if they think they can sell it in Japan than, say, a US venture capital company would. Why? They do that because A, they're only in Japan, and then B, remember, they can borrow money at less than 1% for 10 years. So as long as the profit margins from their investment exceed their interest rate and obviously provide enough profit that they can pay back in 10 years, then they're ahead of the game. So Japanese strategic investors are really great as valuation benchmarks. And indeed, I'm in a medical devices company at the moment where the pre-seed round was a post-money of $4.5 million US. And now we're taking it to Japanese strategic investors, and the pre-money will be $12 million US. So that's a 300% increase. Of course, we have a story behind it, but it's a very good indication of how you can get value ratcheting through having this rather interesting group of investors. If you're after VCs, usually Series A or Series B, look for VCs that are already active in South Asia or Southeast Asia. Why? Because there are lots of VCs out there, and these guys are the more international ones. And generally speaking, they're easier to approach. If you're really early stage, then you might be interested in some of the new incubators which are popping up all over Japan. I'm a mentor for one such incubator in Osaka, and they're taking in 10 companies a year, and most of those companies are getting funded. Okay, I will skip this. So here is a startup program in the Okinawan Institute of Science and Technology, which is actually a university. They take 4 to 5 companies annually. Their cutoff for this year is actually 2 days from now, and 2 companies from India have already applied. I've actually been mentoring those companies. They're offering 140K for 1 to 2 or 3 employees to live in Okinawa for a year. They're offering visas. They have an entrepreneur in residence. They're offering use of their labs. And most importantly, they're offering a gateway to a $100 million local fund in Okinawa. So this is what it looks like. I could imagine being here for a year. I don't know about you. Sriram, you want to live here?
The weather is definitely warmer than what it is in Tokyo right now. Why not?
Exactly.
The Indian weather. This is one of the few places where you'll actually get coconuts and mangoes in Japan.
Indeed, yes, rather south of the main islands of Japan, but still the Japanese work ethic is right there, as is the access to funding and technology. Strategic investors I've mentioned. These are, this is the trend for Japanese VC deals. You can see that it's literally double in the last 6 years. Japanese like doing incremental, and that's exactly what we see here. Okay, so what does it cost to be in Japan? I think for most people who are going to view this, or perhaps are on the stream at the moment, they're startups. This is kind of typical of what it's going to cost you to get started in Japan if you hire out, say, 5 or 6 people. So as you can see, I've allowed for a CEO, 2 salespeople, 2 support people, and an office admin. It's a really, really basic direct selling operation. Obviously, if a distributor, maybe only need 1 person. But if you were to go by yourself, you're looking at roughly $670,000 in the first year, being the setup, the office, the furniture, the legal, the network, and so on. But mostly it's salaries. And by the way, I haven't actually included the recruiting cost, which is 35% of those salaries, unless you get lucky with the first recruit, the CEO, and they bring people with you. So it is significant. There are a number of organizations in Japan that help fresh companies, but basically in order to be able to get funding as a local company, you need to have shown 1 fiscal year. And furthermore, the local guy, be it a Japanese or a non-Japanese, needs to become a guarantor with some assistance from the government. In which case you may be able to receive $200,000-300,000 from something called the Japan Finance Corporation. Anyway, there are many resources for getting funding, but if you're going to go direct, these are the numbers. And this tells you why 70, 80, 90% of companies don't go direct. This is my office on Monday. I'm paying $7,000 for this office. As you can see, I have 1 person working at the office because we're in COVID. So everybody else is working at home. But this is what you'll get for $7,000. It's a nice space. We have windows. I'm obviously got my back to the windows. Okay, so to wrap up, Japan is going through an intense period of change. We have a new prime minister. We have lots of Japanese companies who are doing deals with foreign companies. It's accessible. You just need to have the right people. Japan or China, which one is better? I would say Japan, because it has rule of law. I've done business in China. You can get bigger deals, certainly, but you never know if you're going to get screwed over. Sorry, I don't know if that's allowed that word, but anyway.
Get the money.
Yeah, it's uncertain. The one thing that you can really depend on with the Japanese is that 99% of Japanese companies keep their word. So that's my presentation. If you want to see more, I have a newsletter called Terry's Take at terry.com, my website at japantravel.com, and a consulting business at japandoor.com. So Sriram, any questions?
Yes.
We have 7 minutes, I think so.
Yeah, just leave the slide on for a bit, Terry. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive and clear explanation of what does it take to even get started. Folks in the audience, the newsletter that Terry publishes every week is an awesome source of information. If you have any interest in doing business in Japan or knowing what's going on, I would encourage you to subscribe that newsletter. Japantravel.com as a portal for Japan travel is, again, an incredibly good site. You will get a lot of information which is not available in standard travel sites, if you will. because the content is contributed by actual travelers from their perspective. So it's very easy to relate to the content. So please do take a look at it. This year travel may not be possible. Hopefully next year travel will restart and all of you should come to Japan. Market entry consulting, yeah, it is always helpful to have people who have experimented here enough for a long time. So that's on the content here. Now let me move on to questions. Maybe Terry, you can take off the slides so that we can have a full view.
Yeah,
So I have a question from Kapil. The question is, has COVID created better opportunities for India and Japan partnership?
That's a good question. Well, obviously, Japanese have allowed themselves to become more electronic and remote, which is a huge shift away from their normal behaviors. And of course, is actually one of the reasons why Suga-san, the Prime Minister, is doing away with Hanko, the personal seals. So I can say that there are many more opportunities which have opened up. Honestly speaking, I'm not seeing a lot of Japanese Indian companies take advantage of those opportunities, but I think that's because they don't realize that they're available. So, there's plenty of resources through the Thai Tokyo chapter, not just myself, but actually I would say about half of the charter members are very well connected and are able to provide either consulting or advice or mentoring. So it's really up to Indian companies to seize the initiative. But the answer is the opportunities are definitely there. And when you see an institute like OIST, for example, in Okinawa, as I say, I put that opportunity out a week ago to a friend of mine in Pune. We own a company in Pune, and so we're connected into the universities there. And we had dozens of inquiries and 2 full-fledged business plans launched. So there is something happening, but it's only just happening.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. So the other side of this question is from Japan to India. I think that's definitely increasing. There is a session at 2 p.m. IST in the same auditorium. I would encourage you to come to listen to 2 great people talking about India-Japan partnership. That'll give you some insights on what's happening because of COVID. Let me give you a different question, Terry.
Yeah.
This may be kind of setting you up because I've been here quite a long time, but let me still ask you.
Yeah, sure.
One of the challenges for Japan, I feel, is the industrial structure is reasonably oligopolistic. You talked about 3 to 5 major companies holding dominant shares in an industry. So if you're a B2B player, how does it make sense to get into this tough, tightly controlled game? And India plays cricket, these guys play baseball, we don't even know the rules properly. So how do you even get started?
Yeah, well, obviously the market research is really critical, but let me preface first of all by saying the best place to get started is where the Japanese are not. So if it's something new, something that nobody else is doing, like for example, blockchain is still relatively new in Japan, then that is a great area to be in. Another area to be in is where the Japanese are not good at. And actually, to be honest, they're not really good at fundamental software. So by fundamental software, I mean things like AI and security. And so those are areas where B2B is still very much a viable thing. Sriram, I think you're indicating more things like ERP and process management and that kind of thing. It's tough, man, I'll tell you. And, these big Japanese companies that use that type of product, they expect everything to be totally customized. So if you really have the fortitude and stamina, then the opportunity is to basically provide services first and then turn those services into products. So you'll spend the first 5 years in servitude to the first customer. But that customer will teach you a huge amount about the market. And then once you know that market, then you turn around and actually productize and start selling to smaller companies based on what you've learned. I would say that's the only way forward. You won't make money out of that first customer, but out of the know-how on the product that evolves from that, you'll start making money after that. And clearly, you need to be sure that your contracts with that customer don't forbid you from being able to bank your own IP and bring it out as a product later.
Right. So there's another question which is around, natural areas of partnership. You talked about old age, products towards senior citizens and health related. So the question is, what is the opportunity for a startup in Japan with respect to yoga, meditation, naturopathy, etc.?
Interesting. Actually, women and women entrepreneurs are big in marketing and natural therapy and food and gourmet and so on. So number one thing is that I would seek out female entrepreneurs. Female entrepreneurs, because they're somewhat put down by the business community in general, are hungrier. They're more willing and more able to deal with international companies, and you'll probably get a better deal working with them, and they will work hard for you. So that would be my number one point. Number two is that if there's some aspect which can be tied into the leisure industry, perhaps some IP or something unique that you can bring to large leisure companies, I think that would be interesting. Sorry, that's my timer going off.
We've got another 7 minutes, so maybe
Okay.
another couple of questions.
Okay,
We had one more question. How can Japan encourage for a joint venture in research and innovation in the agriculture sector? Are there any entrepreneur programs by Japanese university?
Well, actually, the OIST program in Okinawa specializes in bio and agri-tech. So actually, that is a good organization to check out and try to get closer to. There are quite a few government-to-government programs going on to help Japan's agricultural sector modernize. And actually, originally I'm from New Zealand. New Zealand has been educating dairy farmers, for example, in Hokkaido, how to crop their cows twice a year, crop their fields twice a year instead of just feeding them grain all the time, which is an expensive value proposition. Doing twice annual cropping literally halves the cost of the dairy, which means that the dairy farmers make more money. Why are the Kiwis doing that? Partly because they want to engender goodwill, and partly because they sell machines, which allow those dairy farmers to take advantage of their newfound wealth and increase it by automating. So I think there are opportunities both ways between Japan and India. I would say that in the agricultural field, one of the biggest opportunities is to actually bring Indian nutraceuticals and functional foods to Japan. There is a huge move in Japan because people are aging, because of COVID, that people are becoming very aware of their diets. This is not like the US where everyone eats a Cinnabon every day. A lot of people are starting to move from white rice to brown rice and so on. So I think there's quite a lot of opportunity in that area. I know there's a lot of interest here in Japan, for example, in turmeric and turmeric derivatives. In fact, one of the biggest money spinners for a nutraceutical firm in Japan is a company called Kanaka. And Kanaka is the only world's only producer of activated CoQ10. Which is called ubiquinol. I believe that's $1 billion business for them. And of course, where they're selling it is in the States. So the core technology was based in Japan, but it's Americans who are buying this stuff. So triangulation, take something that's Ayurvedic from India, bring it to Japan, improve the manufacturing processes and the derivatives, and then sell it in the USA. That's one potential opportunity.
If I can just add a little more to the answer, Terry. Um, there is actually a company called EF Polymer, which came to Thai, Japan. EF Polymer is also presenting in this Thai Global Summit. They were incubated in the Okinawa Agriculture University. So they have an interesting product around super absorbent polymer created out of organic waste. Then there is another company which is also participating in Thai Global Summit. It's a company called Sagri, S-Agri. They are actually in both Japan and in Bangalore. They are a startup funded, I think, by METI, the Ministry of Trade and Industry. They are working on creating land, based on satellite imagery, identifying issues in the agricultural land, and then coming up with models on how to make that land give better yield for a given crop and so on and so forth. So they have a lot of technology, but they are looking for Indian partners who can bring in some of the Indian, insights, if you will. So it's already happening. I think it's just a question of being more aware of what's happening on both sides. And frankly, I think that's a big challenge because I don't think a lot of Indian entrepreneurs look at Japan as the first port of call. We have another 2 minutes. So I'm going to ask you one question, Terry, from my side. And that is, you were probably one of the earliest to identify the potential of Indian software engineers. I remember way back you created a business around bringing Indian technical people to Japan.
Yes.
And you have worked with Indians for a long time. You have a company in Pune, etc. What is your suggestion for Indian companies and Indian people? If you have to give one fundamental thing that they really need to kind of rethink from their mental model, if they want to do business with Japan, what would be that one thing people should really be sensitive to?
I think that's equivalent to the biggest weakness vis-a-vis Japan. The biggest weakness is that Indian companies are not particularly aware of what Japanese consumers need. That's the biggest issue, and not just B2C, B2B as well. So in designing their product, if they spent more time at the front end thinking about what their customer actually needs, they could do way better. So that company that I took over in Pune, their biggest problem was that the software that they developed was from their own heads. And, although they talked to people in the travel industry, it was an iterative and very painful process. So we just told them to scrap the whole thing and we started again. And now we got it right. So, going out and learning what the market wants is probably the biggest thing for them. If I may, oh, sorry, do I have time to?
No, go ahead.
One more thing that I would add is that, India has lost a lot of really skilled people to the US, and I understand why people want to go live in the States. But I've noticed in the last 35 years, I started going to India to recruit in 1990. I've noticed a huge decrease in the availability of highly skilled people. And India needs to do more to retain its good people, especially at the startup level. So that's the second thing I would say.
Thank you. Like somebody taught me during my early part of the stay in Japan, if you're operating in a new area, emerging area where things are still developing, you talked about blockchain, for example. I got a wonderful piece of advice which has really helped me. I think we have to spend a lot more time in educating the customer as well. It's not only about our product, it is also about making sure that the client understands, the whole new area because it's emerging. And if you don't invest that time, a lot of times it becomes quite difficult to succeed with a Japanese client. So that was a piece of advice that worked well for me. Excellent. So thank you. I think there are a few more questions, but we are almost out of time. Thank you very much, Terry, for doing such a wonderful job as always, explaining about what is the business in Japan. And I want to thank, the host of this office, Technomics, Devdas, who's a charter member, for letting me use this office to stream because he has better equipment here. So thank you very much, Devdas. And if people have any questions around Japan, feel free to reach out to TAI Japan through me, and I will help sort out the appropriate expert and connect you with them. Thank you very much for listening to both of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.